It's not often I get to go to the movies, but as someone who wants to get into reviewing them, I gotta at least go every now and then. Luckily, Marvel makes it pretty easy to pick a few months to go. This month was Ant-Man and the Wasp, the direct sequel to the first Ant-Man movie that deals with the consequences of Scott Lang's, played by the charismatic Paul Rudd, participation in the events of Captain America's Civil War. It does a better job of exploring the aftermath of that movie than Civil War did for sure. It's a pretty lighthearted movie, a nice palate cleanser after the events of Infinity War. Which, by the way, I reviewed that movie. Shocker, right? Anyway, it's very similar to the original Ant-Man in terms of tone, and they do a pretty good job of keeping it humorous and interesting while still juggling more serious moments. Pretty much everyone comes back from the original to reprise their roles, including Evangeline Lilly as Hope Van Dyne / Wasp, and Michael Pena as the fast-talking Lewis, while still adding a few fresh faces. As is tradition, before we get to the spoilers, the question that might be on your mind: is it worth it to go see Ant-Man and the Wasp in theaters? If you really, really love the original Ant-Man, I'd say go for it. It's more of the same, but as they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Another important question is, how does this connect to Infinity War? Well, honestly, there's nothing really here that connects Ant-Man and the Wasp to Infinity War, except a post-credit scene. If you're interested to see what's essentially one of the, figuratively, biggest post-credit scenes in the history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, look it up. It's probably online everywhere by this point, and if people don't see it, I guarantee you they're going to be confused as hell come the next Avengers. Now, on to the spoilers. I know, right? That post-credit scene was a huge deal. They pretty much come right out and say it when they mention time vortexes. Considering all the set pictures that have been taken showing Paul Rudd in uniform during what I assume is the Battle for New York from the first Avengers movie, it's pretty clear that there's going to be time travel involved. Or, well, you know, there's only one picture that's truly relevant here, but hey, you get what I mean. This brings me to one of my biggest points. Ant-Man and the Wasp wasn't as good as the first Ant-Man movie. It felt more like Marvel wanted to use it as a stepping stone for Avengers 5. Which makes sense because originally Infinity War was meant to be a two-parter, but Marvel backpedaled pretty heavily on that. They claim that Infinity War being a two-parter wasn't intentional, but it was clearly what they intended to begin with, and I think they simply switched gears and wanted to use a movie to serve as a bridge. This brings us to Ant-Man and the Wasp, which clearly takes place just before the events of Infinity War. Which sort of makes me wonder if Captain Marvel will suffer a similar fate. I mean, it's not that Ant-Man and the Wasp is a bad movie, but putting it in comparison to the original, it just doesn't quite stack up. The climax was better, it felt like there was less downtime, and the fight scenes looked better and were more enjoyable. So what or who is to blame? Personally, I think a lot of that probably came down to budget. Both Ant-Man and the Wasp ran nearly $170 million budgets, which is odd for sequels which usually get a budget increase. When they don't, like with Ant-Man and the Wasp, it says a lot about Marvel's confidence in the movie's potential financial performance. I'll be honest, the lack of extra money in the budget showed. For example, there were several instances where it was super obvious they used CGI. I mean, beyond the moments of the movie where it's obvious there was tons of CGI, like the Quantum Realm sections of the movie. The point is, the budget probably got tight during the movie's post-production. I suspect they tried to get Marvel to funnel more money into the movie, but because the first Ant-Man movie was an underachiever compared to most of Marvel's summer blockbusters, I think they got cold feet and forced the people tied to the movie to work with the limited budget at hand. There's probably something to say about the movie's writing as well, which has a lot of moments that demand you suspend disbelief. Like when it just so happens that after 2 years, Hank and Hope open a tunnel to the Quantum Realm, allowing Janet, Hank's wife, to message Scott Lang, who she's conveniently tangled with on a quantum level. Which, by the way, they only slightly hint at in the first movie. Like, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, and it's something that you kind of have to look back on the first movie in hindsight to really understand. So it's going to confuse a lot of moviegoers because it's been a few years since the first movie. Later, it just so happens that they only have 2 hours to get her, or she's lost for centuries, so on and so forth. Also, there's some talk about how the quantum realm has a different effect on time, yet Janet seems to be the same age as Hank, so I don't know. There's a lot of things in the script that you try to draw conclusions to, but fail because the movie presents you with something completely illogical instead. Because you'd think Janet would starve to death in the quantum realm after 30 years of being stuck there, but no, quantum magic keeps her perfectly fed and perfectly fine. They say something about adaptation and evolution, and Janet has like magic powers and shit. Like, it's so confusing, it's so weird. Anyway, to summarize, Ant-Man and the Wasp isn't necessarily a bad movie, but it isn't nearly as good a movie as the first one was. It also doesn't do very well with the storytelling, and it feels like they wanted less to make an Ant-Man movie, and more like they just wanted a movie to bridge the gap between Infinity War and whatever they plan to name Avengers 5. In that sense, it accomplishes what it sets out to do. It sets up Avengers 5, and that's really the movie's only claim to fame here. I suspect a lot of the hardcore Marvel Cinematic Universe fans will choose to skip Ant-Man and the Wasp during their movie binges and just watch the aforementioned post-credit scene leading into Avengers 5. Do you agree with my opinion on Ant-Man and the Wasp? Let me know what you think in the comments section below, then hit subscribe if you haven't yet. Or follow us on social media, links are in the description. Thanks for watching, see you soon.